Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We're in 1 Samuel, and we're going to be starting in chapter 9 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16, Thy words were found, and I did eat them, and thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, Samuel had described what an earthly king would be like. The children of Israel, they say, no, that's all right. We still want an earthly king. God says, all right, we'll give them that earthly king if that's what they want. And Samuel tells them to go on home and that he would pray and seek God's heart and let them know when the choice has been made. Now we come to chapter 9, and this is where we see the beginning of where this choice has been made. Now, as we start this first chapter in Israel's history of having kings, we will see down through their history of kings that the writers of 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, these writers, they present these kings on how they will represent God during their reign. You know, never is God ever left out of the history of these kings in these books. How these kings relate to God and to the law is the main focus of these books, these 6 books. Now, 2 more things that we need to look at before we start in verse 1. Number 1, there was no war or bloodshed in the change of leadership from Samuel to a king, as we often see happen in worldly nations. Sometimes we see that in worldly nations where one person wants to rule a country and there's a war that takes place. Well, that doesn't happen here. And number 2, it is interesting that although they are rejecting God as their king, yet they let God, through Samuel, choose who will be the first king. At least they didn't take matters into their own hands and crown their own king. So, they could have said to Samuel, you know what, Samuel, look, that's nice, that's great, you go home and you pray, but we're going to find ourselves our own king. No, they honored Samuel. They humbled themselves to Samuel's decisions here, and they allowed God to make to make the decision through Samuel. After the end of chapter 8, it looks as if everyone went back to their normal way of life until God said that it was time to introduce the king. Now we come to verse 1, and verse 1 says, Now there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Bechorath, the son of Aphiah. He was a Benjaminite, a mighty man of power. Now, here in verse 1, we have Saul's genealogy explained. There are 2 main points made in this verse that need to be looked at. Number 1, the first point is that he's a Benjaminite. Now, Benjamin's territory was near the central part of the promised land. It was between Judah to the south and Ephraim to the north. Now, Benjamin was a small tribe between 2 large tribes. The fact that Saul would be a Benjaminite tells us that his reign as king would not continue for many generations. it was already determined by God that the line of kings that would eventually lead to Jesus Christ, the final and the everlasting king of Israel, would be through the tribe of Judah, not through Benjamin. So the fact that the first king, that Saul is from Benjamin, it kind of tells us that the reign of his family as being kings would not last a long time. Number two, the second point in this verse is that it says here, Kish is a mighty, he's a mighty man of power. Now, Saul's father was well known and respected, at least among the Benjaminites. He may also have been a somewhat wealthy man. Therefore, Saul would be the kind of person that the people would at least consider as being king if they had their choice. But there is a great contrast between Saul and Samuel. Whereas Saul's parents were looked up to with a measure of respect, Samuel's mother was childless and despised by Peninnah and rebuked by Eli. Saul is an impressive son with good looks and a bright future, but Samuel was a gift from God to a broken woman who then gives him back to God. The lives of both of these men are opposites of each other. Yet the next king that Samuel will anoint after Saul, which is David, he will be along the same lines as Samuel. The youngest, David is going to be, he's the youngest of 8 sons. He's anointed when he was just a young teenager. And and David will be anointed as king with the smell of sheep on his clothes. That's right. That's right. He's going to be anointed as king with a good fragrance of sheep on his clothes. Now, verse 2. And he had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man, a goodly, and there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward, he was higher than any of the people. Now, those men and women in the world who have a beautiful or a handsome looks have been blessed by God, who formed them in their mother's womb. You know, when we see someone that has great features, beautiful features, that's a blessing from God, because what? That's how God made them when they were in their mother's womb. In most cases, people take their looks and they consume it upon themselves. They use their looks for their own gain and for sinful desires. But looks are a gift from God, and they are to be used for His glory. Concerning Saul, nowhere do we find that he was overoccupied with his looks. God made Saul exactly for this time in Israel's history. God knows that people have a strong tendency to judge and to value a person based upon their outward appearance. And that's true. God was giving Israel the kind of man that they would be satisfied to have as their representative king. They wanted a king just like the other ones, and don't think that the children of Israel didn't want to have a nice looking, handsome king that, tall, dark, and handsome, that they could kind of show off to other nations and say, look at our king. This is our king. Yeah, what do you think about that? And there were other people also whom God made specially handsome and beautiful for his purpose. An example here is Esther. Number one is Esther. God made Esther absolutely beautiful in such a way that God designed her to specifically appeal to the king's desire. When God was making Esther in her mother's womb, God was giving her the eye color, hair color, everything that she was beautiful, yes, but he was designing her to be beautiful specifically that would appeal to the king. Every man has likes and dislikes in the looks of a woman, and God made her to appeal to the king. Number two, the second person is in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 12. We have David. Oh yes, David. The Bible says that God gave David red hair and a beautiful countenance. Oh yes, yep. You don't normally think of David as being a handsome guy, but he was. God made him handsome. And thirdly, in Genesis 29 and verse 17, the Bible says that Leah, she was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful. So here, God does make people handsome. He does make people beautiful. But it's all to be for his glory. It's not to be used for our own independence, for our own, to consume our looks upon ourselves, for our own benefit. It can be difficult for someone, even a Christian, to not let their good looks lead them astray. Even Satan himself was led astray from God, because when he looked, the Bible says, when he looked at himself and saw how beautiful that God had, listen, when he saw himself and saw how beautiful that God had made him, the Bible says his heart was lifted up in him. You want to read that? Read Ezekiel 28, verses 15 and 17. Yes, Satan's heart was turned when he looked at himself and he saw how beautiful God had made him. Now, like Esther, Christians need to see their good looks as a gift from God, maybe for some special purpose, but always to be used for his glory. When a person is beautiful or handsome, they have to, if they're a Christian, they need to question, why did God make me this handsome or this beautiful? Is it for some specific reason or not? I remember missionary reading I forget exactly who it was. I know it was a woman missionary, and I think it was to China, wherever it was, but she didn't like brown, I think it was brown eyes. She always wanted, I think, blue eyes. Maybe you remember who I'm talking about. But she always wanted blue eyes, but she had brown eyes, and she always wondered why. She didn't like her eyes, and she always questioned God as to why she had brown eyes. She didn't like them. But then God called her to be a missionary, and I think it was to China, to some country. And in that country, their color of eyes that they respected the most was brown eyes. Yes, it's true. And then she began to realize, then she knew why God had given her brown eyes. because God had called her to a specific, God in eternity past, God knew he was going to call her to that mission field, and she would need brown eyes. All right, we're going to continue on in verse 3 next lesson. But until then, walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.